The kiss that changed everything. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Sterling Industries tower, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Emma Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway, her yellow rubber gloves squeaking slightly against the chrome handle. It was 6:30 in the morning, and the building was still quiet, just the way she liked it. Emma had been working as a janitor at Sterling Industries for 3 years now. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and the early morning shift meant she could be home when her daughter Sophie got back from school. At 7 years old, Sophie was Emma's entire world. Every mop pushed across these floors, every trash bin emptied, every window cleaned. It was all for her little girl. The executive floor was always Emma's last stop. She saved it for the end because it was the quietest, the most peaceful. Up here, on the 42nd floor, the city looked small and manageable through those massive windows. Up here, Emma could pretend, just for a moment, that life wasn't quite so hard. She began her routine, moving from office to office with practiced efficiency. She had just finished vacuuming the conference room when she heard a sound that didn't belong. A harsh, gasping noise coming from one of the corner offices. Emma's heart quickened. She abandoned her cart and hurried toward the sound, her worn sneakers silent on the carpet. The door to the largest office stood ajar, and through the gap, she could see someone on the floor. Her hands trembled as she pushed the door open wider. A man in an expensive charcoal suit lay sprawled beside a massive mahogany desk, his face pale and twisted in pain. His hand clutched at his chest, and his breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps. Emma recognized him immediately. Everyone in the building knew Alexander Sterling, the billionaire CEO, the man whose name was on the building itself. Mr. Sterling. Emma dropped to her knees beside him, her training from a first aid course she'd taken years ago flooding back. "Can you hear me?" His eyes found hers, wide and unfocused. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His lips were turning blue. Emma's mind raced. Heart attack, stroke. She reached for her phone to call 911, but Alexander's hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. He shook his head frantically, his eyes pleading. He pointed at something on his desk. An EpiPen. Understanding crashed over her. Not a heart attack, anaphylaxis, severe allergic reaction, and he couldn't breathe well enough to tell her what he needed. Emma lunged for the desk, grabbing the EpiPen, but as she turned back to him, she saw his eyes rolling back, his body going slack. He was losing consciousness. The EpiPen would help, but she knew from her training that time was everything. His airway was closing. He needed air. Now, without thinking, without hesitation, Emma tilted his head back and pinched his nose. She placed her mouth over his and gave 2 rescue breaths, just like she'd learned. His chest rose slightly. She administered the EpiPen into his thigh through his trousers, then gave 2 more breaths. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, stay with me." She gave another breath, then another. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the elevator ding, heard voices and running footsteps. But she didn't stop. She kept breathing for him, kept fighting for this stranger's life, because that's what you did. That's what any mother would want someone to do for their child. Finally, blessedly, Alexander gasped. His eyes flew open, and he sucked in a ragged breath on his own. Color began to return to his face. The paramedics burst through the door seconds later, and Emma stumbled backward, her legs shaking, her hands trembling. She watched from the corner as they worked on him, checking his vitals, loading him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him toward the elevator, Alexander's eyes found hers across the room. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Then he was gone, and Emma was left standing there in her janitor's uniform with her yellow gloves, wondering if what had just happened was even real. 3 days passed. Emma went back to her routine, back to her early morning shifts and her quiet floors. She told herself that saving Alexander Sterling's life didn't change anything. She was still Emma Rodriguez, single mother, janitor, woman who counted every dollar and worried every night. Men like Alexander Sterling lived in a different world. But on the 4th day, she was called to the security desk. Her supervisor, Mr. Harrison, stood there looking uncomfortable and confused. Beside him stood a woman in a pristine white suit, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of polite professionalism. "Ms. Rodriguez," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Chen, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. Mr. Sterling has been trying to reach you. He'd very much like to speak with you if you have a moment." Emma glanced at Mr. Harrison, who looked as bewildered as she felt. I'm working, my shift. Will be covered," Victoria said smoothly. "Please, it's important." 5 minutes later, Emma found herself in an elevator, rising up toward the executive floor once again. But this time, she wasn't pushing a cleaning cart. This time, she was heading to the top floor. The penthouse office she'd never been allowed to clean. The doors opened to reveal a space that looked more like a luxury apartment than an office. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Alexander Sterling. He turned as she entered, and Emma was struck by how different he looked. There was a softness in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said quietly. "Emma, thank you for coming." "You're welcome. I'm glad you're okay." The words tumbled out awkwardly. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I'm more than okay, thanks to you. The doctors said if you hadn't acted when you did, I wouldn't have made it. You saved my life." Emma didn't know what to say to that. She twisted her hands together, suddenly very aware of her faded uniform, her worn shoes. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," Alexander continued. "About priorities, about what matters. I've built this company, made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but when I was lying on that floor, none of it meant anything. The only thing that mattered was that someone cared enough to help. You didn't know who I was. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped." He moved closer, his expression earnest. "I want to do something for you, anything, name it." Emma thought of Sophie, of their tiny apartment, of the bills that never seemed to stop coming. She thought of all the things she could ask for. But what came out of her mouth surprised even her. "Tell me why you were in the office so early, why you were alone." Alexander blinked, clearly not expecting that question. Then, slowly, he smiled again. "I couldn't sleep. I'd been working all night on a deal that suddenly seemed pointless. I ate some of the client's gift basket without checking the ingredients. Stupid mistake. Turned out it had hazelnuts. I'm severely allergic." "Do you do that often, work all night alone?" "More than I should," he admitted. Emma nodded slowly. "I work early mornings so I can be there when my daughter gets home from school. She's 7. Her name is Sophie. She's the reason I do everything I do." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition, that, he said softly, "is something I understand. My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me. I remember what it was like, even though it was a long time ago." They stood there in the morning light, 2 people from different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis and an unexpected conversation. And in that moment, Emma realized that maybe the distance between their worlds wasn't quite as vast as she'd thought. "Have coffee with me," Alexander said suddenly. "Not here, somewhere normal. I'd like to hear more about Sophie, about you." Emma hesitated. This man was a billionaire. She was a janitor. This couldn't lead anywhere real. But then she looked into his eyes and saw something genuine there. Something lonely and hopeful and human. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I buy my own coffee." Alexander's laugh was warm and real. "Deal." As Emma left his office that morning, heading back down to her cart and her routine, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not hope, exactly, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. She thought of Sophie and smiled. Life had a funny way of changing when you least expected it. All because of one kiss that saved a life. And maybe, just maybe, changed too.